The impressive mass extends towards the sea in tongues of ice. One of these, the Brida Merkurjökull, flows into a lake that freezes over in winter, the Jökulsárlón. Blocks of ice break off the front of the glacier. The largest will drift with the currents for several years, eventually reaching the ocean on the other side of the lake.
Ice floes cover the lake in winter, making it possible to walk out to the icebergs. Some of them are enormous. Half-hidden openings allow the rare tourist to go out literally into the heart of the ice. These passages open onto veritable caverns, large enough for a man to stand up in. Visitors are plunged into a surprising universe of crystalline shapes within these blue, translucent walls. Air bubbles, imprisoned for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, will soon be released into the atmosphere. Similarly, basalt dust, formed by the many volcanic eruptions that have marked Iceland's history, is frozen, embedded in the ice, to be released during the next thaw.
As spring arrives, the ice floes slowly melt, freeing the icebergs. Each year, the Jökulsárlón, which didn't exist at the beginning of this century, gnaws away at the glacier. In the last 50 years, the thickness of the glacier has decreased by 1 meter. The icebergs continue to advance slowly. Like ambassadors from the Icelandic giant, they take to the seas, bearing witness to the glacier's enormous mass. Despite the fact that it's slowly shrinking, the Vatnajökull still has a volume of 3,500 cubic kilometers of ice.
Citius, Altius, Fortius. Farther, higher, braver. This is the motto Pierre de Coubertin chose to symbolize the meeting of giants at the Olympic Games. Nature, too, has its champions, its records, and its giants, which fill man's imagination with their challenge, their glory, their fascination.
The European colossus that fits all three of these bills is the sumptuous, gigantic mountain range of the Alps. 1,000 kilometers long and an average of 200 kilometers wide, the Alps form a circular arc from Maribor on the Slovenian border all the way to Nice on the French Riviera, crossing 6 countries: France, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Liechtenstein, and Austria. The Alps were formed relatively recently, thrust up in the Tertiary period by the tectonic pressure created by the collision of the African and Eurasian continental plates. In fact, the Alps have been continuously expanding for 37 million years. Today they are rising at a rate of 1 to 1.5 millimeters per year. Meanwhile, however, erosion continues its work of destruction. Every year it reduces the range's height by about 0.6 millimeters. Elsewhere on the European continent, only the Iberian Peninsula and Sicily have peaks reaching altitudes of more than 3,000 meters.
But unlike them, the Alps present an unbroken chain of peaks over 3,000 meters high. In the Dolomites, the Torre Trieste is an odd example of these high Italian peaks. In Switzerland, pyramid-shaped Mount Selvin, rising to almost 4,500 meters, is the fourth highest peak in Europe.
Altius, the highest of them all, belongs to this group. The Mont Blanc presents its majesty to man's gaze, and men couldn't resist the temptation to conquer these heights between heaven and earth.
Today, man has left his mark on every summit in this gigantic mountain range. Man, fragile and mortal, discovers something powerful, something eternal in these mountains. At these altitudes, the mountain climber's calling seems to have a spiritual dimension. Richard Bach, speaking through his character Jonathan Livingston Seagull, describes this aspiration toward even greater heights just for the pure pleasure of it.
I don't want a reward. I have no desire to become a leader. I just want to share my discovery, show others the horizons that can open up before us.
In 1786, Balmat and Paccard, two inhabitants of Chamonix, were the first to enjoy this unequaled view from the 4,807-meter summit of the Mont Blanc.
Not far from the Mont Blanc, the Aiguille du Midi is renowned for its ski lift, the highest in the world. For skiers, this is the starting point for a thrilling descent into the Vallée Blanche, the White Valley, a marvelous 18-kilometer run down the 2,700-meter high slope. The Cog Railway stops at the Montanvert station at 1,913 meters to let tourists off right on the shores of the Mer de Glace, the Sea of Ice. It's one of the things that has made this exceptional glacier famous worldwide.
Drawing its source from the snowfalls that accumulate throughout the year at an altitude of about 3,000 meters, the Sea of Ice flows down the slopes of the Mont Blanc like a river. Under the pressure of its own weight, the snow turns to ice and flows at a rate of 1 centimeter per hour, taking about 100 years to reach the altitude of 1,500 meters. In a single year, the glacier advances about 100 meters, fissuring as it moves across the uneven terrain. This creates crevices, some of which are several dozen meters deep.
There are over 50 glaciers in the Mont Blanc range. Those which, like the Sea of Ice, have a low incline, provide magnificent routes into the heart of the range. Access by other, steeper glaciers is more difficult. The sheer Bossong Glacier is perhaps the finest example. Considered the largest ice fall in Europe, it carries the accumulated snows from the slopes of the Mont Blanc to an altitude of 1,200 meters. No other glacier in the Alps descends so low.
Much farther to the north, the backbone of the low Scandinavian peninsula never rises higher than 2,500 meters. Two immense plateaux at its southern end, the Jotunheimen and the Hardangervidda, cover a large portion of Norway. The Hardangervidda, 900 meters above sea level, is the largest mountainous plateau in Europe. 1/3 of its 10,000 square kilometer surface area is protected as Norway's largest natural park. This wild region, crisscrossed by numerous rivers, is a veritable paradise for nature lovers and fishermen.
At a lower altitude is the world's largest plain, the Northern European Plain, which stretches from France to Russia. Poland, located in the midst of this vast region, has rather even terrain, except in the south where the valleys of the Carpathian Mountains on the Slovakian border cut across the landscape. Running through this setting is the Dunajec River, which has its source at the border. Its waters flow into those of the Vistula, which crosses Poland to the Baltic Sea.
At several places on the river, there are rapids, to the great pleasure of the Poles, who flock here from Krakow, 60 kilometers to the north. Rafting has become a major tourist attraction. This region is also known for its hiking, and there are numerous trails through the natural park created around this landmark to preserve its rare plant species.
But the most remarkable sights here are undoubtedly the vast gorges cut by the Dunajec through the limestone of the Pieninė Range. To get the full sense of these incredible natural sculptures, you've got to hike an hour to the best viewpoints, otherwise they're inaccessible.
The Bikaz River has also carved a deep bed. Southwest of the city of Bikaz, the river's turbulent waters have patiently eroded away the stone, little by little creating the spectacular gorges of Bikaz. In all, they're 20 kilometers in length, but one 1,000-meter-long section of the gorges is particularly impressive. The walls are almost vertical. We are in Romania, north of the eastern Carpathian Mountains. At the bottom of the gorges, a little road was built along the river. Sometimes the pathway was so narrow that the rock had to be cut away. And the steep walls are stunning. Only a few animals accustomed to these dizzying slopes are able to live here. For example, the Ticodrome, an inhabitant of these high peaks. Or the chamois, a specialist in coping with rough terrain.
The fragile limestone that makes up the Causse region in southern France facilitated the formation of deep gorges like those along the Tarn River. Floating along the river at the foot of these gigantic walls is an unforgettable experience. Unlike the gorges of Bikaz, the Tarn gorges are remarkable for their length. Stretching for 90 kilometers, they offer an incredible number of spectacular viewpoints and amazing natural landmarks. The Tarn flows along a series of fault lines, and by deepening them, it has created a canyon with sheer walls and stunning gullies.
The width depth at the bottom of the canyon varies from 30 to 500 meters, while 500 meters above, the distance between the canyon rims ranges from 1,200 to 2,000 meters. Kilometers to the east, the Verdon River springs from the base of Mount Sestriere and rushes toward the valley in a green torrent. Then, its floods calmed by a series of dams, it flows along at widely variable levels depending on the season. After crossing the calcareous Provence Alps for 200 kilometers, it flows into the Durance River. In the second half of its journey, it runs for 21 kilometers through the deepest canyon in France, sometimes 700 meters below ground level.
The Verdon gorges are narrower than those of the Tarn, and it was impossible to lay a road along their full length. In some places at the bottom, the gorges are less than 6 meters wide. But there's a footpath so tourists can hike down to the bottom and see the Verdon's tunnels, gullies, and the spectacular breaches in the canyon walls.
The French Provence, and above all the Languedoc region, have other hidden marvels to discover. Here, thanks again to the properties of the limestone, one finds a unique underground world. The large number of caves identified and outfitted for tourists makes this region exceptional. On a 250-kilometer path between the Rhône and the city of Carcassonne, there are 15 extraordinary caverns open to visitors. Together, they represent some 500 kilometers of galleries, and more are being discovered every year.
France and the United States have the largest number of caves of any countries in the world. With 106 caves open to visitors, 10 of them ranking among the top international locations, France is clearly the leading European nation as far as caves are concerned. In fact, over half of the caves in Europe are located in France. And among the giants beneath the French landscape are some of the world's deepest caverns.
However, Europe's largest cavern is 1,000 kilometers farther to the east, in Austria. On the slopes of the Tennengebirge, at an altitude of 1,641 meters, lies the entrance to the caverns of Eisreisenwelt, that is to say, the world of ice giants. Indeed, enormous accumulations of ice give the caves nearest the entrance a very distinct character. In places, these glacial formations can reach 20 meters in depth, and they offer visitors a grandiose, fairy tale-like spectacle.
Eisreisenwelt, a labyrinth of galleries and chambers almost 50 kilometers in length, was discovered in 1878. This gigantic cavern is a vast cavity of more than 10,000 square meters within the rock of the Alps. It is the largest ice cave in the world.
The third highest mountain range in Europe, after the Alps and the Spanish Sierra Nevada, the Pyrenees lie along the border between France and Spain. Produced by tectonic thrust only 20,000 years before the Alps were formed, the Pyrenees is therefore also a young mountain range. It stretches for 450 kilometers and is about 100 kilometers wide. The Gavarnie Mountains are the highest limestone formation of their kind in Europe. They're dominated by Mont Perdu, the second highest peak in the Pyrenees, second only to Aneto, which is 3,404 meters high.
Gavarnie is a remarkable landmark for other reasons, in particular its well-known cirque that attracts numerous tourists, some of them even coming by donkey. Hiking is the best way to reach the site, however, because the cirque is located in the Pyrenees National Park. The setting is astonishing. As one enters this giant natural amphitheater, one has a growing impression of being crushed by nature. We are at an altitude of 1,600 meters, and the walls around us reach up into the clouds 1,700 meters overhead at more than 3,000 meters.
This cirque was carved out 20,000 years ago during the Quaternary era by a glacier that descended from Gavarnie to Lourdes, ripping up enormous rocks as it moved forward. Then, waters flowing into the Po River continued to erode away the limestone rock. 13 waterfalls hurtle down the cirque walls. The largest has a relatively low rate of flow and falls suddenly from a height of 423 meters. The stream vaporizes into a superb plume as it plunges down this incredible distance. The Gavarnie waterfall is the highest in Europe.
Fed by a dozen glaciers, the Krimner Ache hurtles down towards the valley of Salzach. We are once again in Austria, this time in the west between Innsbruck and Salzburg. Flowing down the slopes of the Hohe Tauern, the river forms some of the most powerful waterfalls in Europe and some of the most spectacular in the Alps.